Introductions. So hello everyone from my side. My name is Pille and I am the product manager at E-Residency. And I'm really happy to have Katrin here today from the Estonian Chamber of Notaries.
Hello.
And Katrin is going to help us to understand better which would be the best form of business to start in Estonia as an e-resident, because I know that many e-residents have had that question and they have written to us about it. And Katrin is also going to introduce us the e-Notary services that might benefit you when you want to start and run your business in Estonia. And if you have questions, then I would be grateful if you would post them to the Q&A section, not to the chat, because it's easier to observe only one place at a time. So I guess during the webinar and after the webinar, we will check the Q&A panel as well. So feel free to ask anything you want. Okay, Katrin, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I was asked by Pille to talk about the different legal forms of business that are available in Estonia and that e-residents have been most interested in. The private limited company, non-profit association, sole proprietor and subsidiaries. And I will also speak a little about establishing the private limited company and the obligations that this brings. And yes, also about Estonian e-Notary Services in the end. First, the private limited company. It is certainly the most popular type of business form in Estonia amongst Estonians and also the e-residents, and you will find out in the next 5 minutes why. It is the easiest form of company in Estonia, simplest and easiest. Its owner's liability is only limited to its share capital, the owner's share capital, because generally when the owner has established a private limited company, the shareholder himself or herself is not liable to the creditors of the company, and only the company itself is liable. There are two differences. First one is that when the initial contribution, which is the minimum amount is 2,500 euros, is not paid yet, then in this amount the shareholder can be liable to the company's creditors.
Can you explain more? Sorry, can you explain what does it mean that the company shareholder is liable? Does it mean that if the company owner fails to pay a debt or something like that, then
exactly.
Okay.
If the company fails to pay a debt, or he has, purchased goods from another person and cannot pay for the goods, then this is the company's debt generally, and the shareholder is not liable for this debt. But there is also another exception that is rarely used. You would have to go to court for it, but when the shareholder knowingly does something in the shareholder's capacity that she knows that will harm the creditors or the company itself, takes a decision, then he might be liable also. But the third person will have to go to the court, and it's not an easy process to establish this kind of liability in Estonia. It is not done very often. It happens only in rare cases, and the shareholder has to be really wanting to harm someone financially.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. The management body of the private limited company is the management board. There can be only one person, for example. So the one-man companies are very popular, where there is only one shareholder, and the shareholder is at the same time the only management board member. But I will talk about the private limited company much more later. The sole proprietor, well, for Estonians, yes, it is also an easy business form. because, for example, differently from the limited liability company, to register yourself as a sole proprietor, you don't even need an initial capital. But the difference is that the sole proprietors, they are not legal entities. They sell their goods or provide the services at their own name, on their own behalf, which also means that they are liable for the business with all their money. All the estate or property. It is not, for example, if I have a family home, then this could be sold if I am in debt towards my creditors in the business that I'm running as a sole proprietor. So this is the main reason probably that this is not a very, very common business form, or is much less common than choosing the limited liability company. But what is even more, yeah, please, Pille.
Sorry, I wanted to ask, but then can you comment about the taxation rules that apply to the sole proprietor? I think they're also a bit different than for the private limited company, right?
Yes, they are totally different. For example, the sole proprietor has to pay quarterly advance payments of income and social tax, but this wouldn't apply to e-residents, because the physical persons and sole proprietors can be taxed in Estonia only if they live in Estonia and have the residence in Estonia. And to register yourself as a sole proprietor, you cannot do it when you do not live or have residency in Estonia or have a business here in Estonia. So I was, like 5 years ago, I was also advising the e-residency team on legal matters, and I had this consultation with the Ministry of Justice asking about if an e-resident could be a sole proprietor, and they said no. Basically, it is possible to register oneself as such in the commercial register, but this has not been the intention of the legislator to have people who don't live in Estonia as sole proprietors here. So I can't recommend this type of business form to e-residents.
Mm-hmm.
The next one is non-profit association. In a way, it is similar to a company because it is also a legal entity, and the accounting rules are similar, for example. The taxation is somewhat different, but I am not a tax lawyer. I can't, give the good advice on the tax matters. I know that non-profit associations, some of them can be inserted in a special list in tax matters that they can get certain tax benefits. But I think this mainly applies if some kind of activity is taking place in Estonia, or maybe not. For that, I would suggest to consult with a tax professional. But it is totally different from the company or the limited liability company in that sense that it doesn't have shareholders, it doesn't have share capital, and it can't distribute profit to its members. The goal of a non-profit association is normally not making business by itself, but the goal is normally like charity, or to open a sports club, or for education or culture, or to raise environmental awareness, or just to be a hobby or interest group. So it can make profits, it can have a bank account, it can have employees, it can pay salary to the employees and so on, but all the profit that it makes, it should spend on this specific one goal, and it can distribute the profits to the members who established the NGO, non-profit association.
Is there a limit how many founders there has to be in a non-profit association?
Yes, at least two, and both of them have to have the resident card for the non-profit association to be, for it to be possible to be established in the electronically in the portal. Of course, the other members can be added later according to the conditions that are in the Articles of Association. Also, currently there is no good e-voting system for in the legal acts for the non-profit associations, but this is going to change already in the next few months because the draft act for that is already in Parliament. And well, now when all the members have an e-residency card, they can sign the decisions of the non-profit associations digitally, anonymously, and they don't have to come together to make decisions.
Okay, but there's a question from one of our listeners that how is the non-profit registered in Estonia? Is it also registered in the company registration portal or?
Basically, it's the same portal, yes. There are different registers where they are eventually end up or registered, but the portal is the same.
Okay.
Yeah. Subsidiaries. The word subsidiary actually can be understood in two different meanings. One is the daughter company of another company, of a parent company. A daughter company is a separate legal entity. And basically it is just like any other company established in Estonia. There might be again some minor tax differences, like paying dividends and the deduction of dividends paid by the parent company and so on. But basically it's just like a normal company here in Estonia. It could be established in the format again in the limited liability company or in or as a public limited liability company, but the public limited liability company requires a minimum share capital of at least 25,000 euros. The registration process will be somewhat harder because as the shareholder is another company in a different country, then the payment of the initial share capital cannot be deferred. And this makes the registration somewhat more complicated and it takes more time. You first need to have a bank account and so on.
So you would have to pay the share capital contribution right away, right?
Yes, and for that it would be better to have an Estonian bank account for that company. Like any other local company, the subsidiary should have a legal address and a contact person in Estonia. And yeah, I think it would be reasonable to establish a daughter company for a parent company whose main office will remain for its activities outside, for example, European Union, so it would have a body in the European Union. And for example, a branch office, which is not a legal entity itself, the point of establishing one in Estonia would be, there would be any point probably only if the actual branch would have some kind of physical activity in Estonia. So it would be easier to, for example, to prove the right of representation of the board members when the branch office is registered in Estonia. But for the other making business with other European Union countries, I think the branch office wouldn't be the greatest idea.
Okay, so for example, if I would be an entrepreneur in the UK and I would like to, and I would want my company to remain in the EU after Brexit, then the daughter company would be the correct solution for me. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I would say so, yes. So this is the short introduction of the disadvantages and advantages and differences of different legal forms of business in Estonia. And I think from that we can conclude that actually the only legal form that an e-resident should use, if it's not a charity or if it wants to make profit, if it wants to make business, is still the limited liability company.
Mm-hmm.
I would talk thus a little about establishing a private limited company. Usually it is done in the company registration portal. It can be also done using the help of a notary, but that I can talk about later. Also, the several service providers like One Office, I know, and Lipin have included this company registration portal in their own web pages. I haven't seen them. The aim of them doing this was to make the completion or the registration process somewhat easier and more user-friendly. But in the end, the result will be the same, I guess. And of course, to register a business in the company registration portal, you can always, an e-resident can always use the help of a business service provider if some of the things here remain unclear or he or she needs advising. I will go through the process briefly, because some of the steps here actually help to explain the obligations that come along with having a company here in Estonia. You need to log in with an e-resident card or mobile ID. And then you have to think of some initial matters before starting entering the information here. For example, one thing is the business name. The business name should be different from all the other companies' business names that are already registered in Estonian business registry. It should be in Latin alphabet, preferably without special characters. Well, there are some specific characters in Estonian language that can be used. You can check the information regarding choosing the business name on different pages. First page is the state portals page that is called Selection and Verification of the Business Name. This will give a good overview what kind of business name you could choose, and also to compare your selected business name to the already existing business names in the register. You can choose the company portal page for that. Enter the name here, and usually there is the requirement that the name needs to be at least 2 characters different from any other names that appear here when you enter your business name. Then you need to have an Estonian address and a contact person. This service is provided by many service providers. I have included here in this slide the e-resident.gov.ee webpage that gives a list of different service providers. They do not only provide the contact address and the contract person service, but they also, in many cases, can help you with accountancy and tax advice. I certainly recommend using one of those. Actually, the notaries could also be contact persons, but I think there are about 100 notaries in Estonia, a little bit less, and I think that there is only one notary that is actually giving this service. So the notaries are not very interested in that, I'm sorry to say. I also checked from the E-Residency webpage that the pay for these service providers is between 60 to 100 euros per month. And it can also include the accounting service and sometimes the tax advice. So it doesn't seem unreasonably high for me. The next thing you need to think about is the management of the company. As I said, if it is a one-person company, then the management board member can also be the shareholder. If there is a contact person who is in Estonia, located in Estonia, the management board member can be the e-resident who lives anywhere in the world. Unless, like in many other countries, Estonia doesn't require a management board member to be Estonian. The management board member has to be a natural person. In Estonia, it's not possible to have a legal person as a management board member. And also the management board member has to be an e-resident because he needs to manage the company in the business register later, and this can be also only done with the residency card. The next thing that needs to be thought about are the shareholders and the share capital. There can be as many shareholders as you want, but they all need to be residents. For start, later you can of course sell the shares also to a person who is not an e-resident, but this will be somewhat hard because they would have to come to Estonia physically if they are not e-residents. If they are e-residents, they can do the transaction with a notary remotely, but I will talk about this a bit later. The minimum required share capital is 2,500 euros. It can be paid well, basically, it can be paid when establishing company during the registration process. But in practice, this is also only possible for the Estonian people who already have some kind of Estonian bank account or some kind of relations with Estonian bank. For e-residents, it is suggested to defer the payment of the contribution. First establish the company and then get the account for the company from a bank or a financial service provider, then make the payment and get the confirmation of the payment from the financial service provider. The only trick is that the confirmation has to be in Estonian and digitally signed. Some financial service providers I know provide this service also in Estonian, but if not, then the person should go to a notary and get the document notarized. And I believe that this should be the notary of the country where the financial service provider actually is, where the person or the representative of the financial service provider can actually go to the notary and sign the document to confirm that this payment has to be made. Generally, after you have the confirmation and you want to enter into the registry the information that now the the initial contribution has been paid, it takes up to 2 days to make the amendment in the registry. Until that, there will be a note in your business register card that the payment has not been made. And for some business partners, this might leave the image of not so very, trustworthy company because the initial capital hasn't been paid. I don't know how true that is, but this is what I have heard. Basically, it is possible to defer the payment for as long as you want, but the trick here is that, as I mentioned earlier, The shareholder is liable to the company's creditors with his amount of the contribution until the payment is made. And secondly, the company cannot pay dividends until from the profit until the payment has been made. It can pay salary, for example, but not dividends. And here, to clear a misunderstanding, you cannot pay the dividends from the initial contribution. The dividends can only be paid from the profit that the company makes. Something that I wanted to talk about a little is the use of the share capital. I have heard or read from here and there that once you have paid the share capital in, you can use it for your company's expenses and, you know, spend it. This is not entirely true, because actually the law says that the net assets of a company cannot fall below the 2,500 euro minimum. So if the net assets fall below that threshold, the shareholders should do something about it. Otherwise, in principle, the register could delete the limited liability company from the register. But this rarely happens, because, as we know, actually a company can be established without making the initial share capital contribution at all. And I haven't heard of any cases that the company actually had been deleted because of this problem. But we'll see. I just wanted to mention it because there is a slight possibility that this might happen. Then, when establishing a company, you need to insert the dates for financial year. Financial year is 12 months, and usually it starts on the 1st of January, ends on 31st of December. However, it is possible to change it to any 12 months period as the person or the owner of the company wants. The next thing you need to do in the company registration portal is to either enter your own articles of association or to use the template that is offered in the portal. Some of the conditions there are, you know, you can make a selection. For example, you can decide whether, when one shareholder sells his or her share, if the other shareholders have the right of preemption and can buy it instead of the initial buyer. Or if, for example, selling a share would need a decision of all the shareholders or the consent of the management board, and so on. There is also, I get a lot of questions about the legal reserve. The template offers you to make a decision if you want the company to have a legal reserve or not. Well, the legal reserve was compulsory in Estonia for companies maybe like 5 years ago, and it's not compulsory anymore. It basically means that you have the extra money put aside if something happens. You can cover the losses from the legal reserve, but you can't make dividend payments from the legal reserve. And this is voluntary. You can choose that you don't have the legal reserve. The company does not have a legal reserve. Another thing that the template mentions, but you can't make any selections in the template itself, is the special rights of the shareholders. For that, if you want your shareholders to have any special rights, you would actually need to draw up your own articles of association, or to turn to a legal professional like a notary, for example. The specific rights can be rights, for example, you can decide when there are two shareholders in a company having 50% and 50% votes of shares, then their votes also are equal to the shares they have. But in some decisions, you can decide that, okay, this is a very important question for me. I have more votes always in this question. Or that in these or that kind of questions, one shareholder has the right to veto the decision. Or that one shareholder can, for example, choose 2 management board members, and the other one can only choose 1 management board member. What else? Also the conditions under which the shareholders can exclude some shareholders from the company. This can also be seen under the special rights, but this needs drawing up your own articles of association. But you can also choose in the articles of association is the percentage that is needed to take decisions. Normally it is 51%. There are some specific decisions that need a higher percentage of votes, but you can choose it from here as you wish. And the company registration portal also offers the possibility to, for example, set a supervisory board. This is not obligatory for a limited liability company, but it will be like a council who oversees the activities of a management board. And you can also have an auditor, but an auditor is also not compulsory for a small limited liability company. To have the auditor as a compulsory element, there are also some thresholds that need to be exceeded. For example, the turnover or income with more than 4 million euros, I think, or the number of employees that is more than 50 people, and things like this. For a small company, the auditor is not necessary. Next, you will have to choose a field of activity. This can be done with the help of the company registration portal. You need to choose one principal activity, but there can be other activities, like additional activities. And every year when you submit an annual report, the list of activities that the company has actually had can be revised and changed. So this can change in time. Some activities, of course, need a special licensing, or there are other special requirements, and this can be checked either in the state portal. For example, there are special licensing requirements for activities like financial activities, including virtual currencies, gambling, things like these. Selling medications, so on. There's another page for checking the special requirements in this address here. Also, the e-business register, or the company registration portal, offers the opportunity to register for VAT registration, or submit an application for that. Again, I'm not a tax expert, but as far as I understood from our tax office's webpage, generally the VAT registration obligation starts with a turnover, I think, from 40,000 euros. And if the company doesn't have any actual business in Estonia, the transactions are not made in Estonia, the goods are not sold to Estonia, to Estonian taxpayers, then the tax office might refuse of giving a VAT registration number to the applicant. But I think there was a very good explanation of that on the E-Residence webpage and also on the tax office's webpage. I think the persons that are interested should read that. It is quite comprehensive. And in addition to VAT, of course, all the other tax matters should be, for me, I think, most important or preliminary before starting a business in Estonia, because under Estonian law, yes, automatically all Estonian companies that are here registered will be the income taxpayers for Estonia, but at the same time, if their real activity is going on in another country, then they should be actually paying tax in their home country. And then there are the mutual tax agreements between the countries, or maybe there are not. And every business, every country, and every type of activity has its own rules. And there is probably not one solution for all. Possibility here. I again recommend to use a tax site advisor for that. Again, I think we have covered most of the information that needs to be inserted in the business register. I just wanted to give a friendly reminder that giving false information is punishable in Estonia. Sorry for that. If later the data of the company needs to be changed in the portal, this is relatively easy if the management board has a e-residency card. Some changes that are actually entered in the registry card need an extra state fee to be paid. But just to enter some decisions of shareholders, this is state fee free. Now, if we are talking about the obligations of Estonian registered companies, then I think the main obligation is to submit annual reports every year. This is also obligatory for dormant companies who actually don't have any active business activities in that financial year. And if you don't provide the annual report for the business registry, then they can, first they will warn you, second they can fine you, and in the end they might delete the company from the business portal. The annual report has to be in Estonian. It has a lot of nuances. So at least in the first few years or first year, I again would suggest using an Estonian accountant to help with that. And when generally a management board can submit the annual report in the company registration portal himself or herself, he can also give this right to the accountant, so he doesn't have to do it himself. Dividend, salary, and director's fee. Again, this has to do with taxation, and depending where the e-resident is coming from and what are the activities and so on. But I can say give a few basic guidelines. You don't have to pay salary and director's fee if you don't want to. But later, if you make the dividend payments to the shareholders, who are the same persons actually as the director, then you should take into consideration that the salaries and director's fees would trigger more tax responsibilities than paying a dividend in Estonia. And for example, in local companies, for this reason, the tax authorities sometimes have modified the dividend payments into, salary payments, or said that you can't pay dividends. This was actually a salary and should be taxed accordingly. Directors' fees are taxed in Estonia, even if the director is a non-resident. But the salary to other employees is taxed. The personal income tax is taken by the country where the person physically works. This is not an Estonian tax if the person physically doesn't work in Estonia. To pay dividends, you can do it on the basis of the annual report. This should be approved by the shareholder. When deciding on the dividend amount, it cannot exceed the profits, of course, and you also need to take into the account the minimum net assets requirement. Then the general meeting of the shareholders, or maybe there's just one shareholder, will decide how to distribute dividends, to whom and how much. The company will pay the dividend money to the shareholders' account. A respective entries should be made in the accounting, and then tax is paid. But again, the taxation, I can't advise here. Maybe the taxes will be paid in Estonia, but maybe they need to be paid in another country. The main obligation for the shareholder is to avoid double taxation for himself or herself. If we imagine that at one point the person doesn't want to have an Estonian company anymore, then I would, as a legal advisor, of course, suggest to delete it yourself from the registry rather than wait for it to be deleted by the court in the compulsory deletion process. For that, you need to have a general meeting. Maybe there are a few shareholders, maybe there is only one. Decide about the liquidation, go through again the accountancy, delete the board members in the register, register the liquidator. One of the liquidators must have residence in Estonia. So normally for Estonian companies, the liquidator is also the management board member. Then for e-resident companies, you need to nominate someone else as a liquidator if the management board member does not live in Estonia. Then the official public notification is made in the state notification portal. The creditors should be let know that the company is now going to be dissolved. They will have about 4 months to make the claims. Then the company's assets might be sold. The creditors' claims must be paid, and the rest of the property can be distributed between the shareholders, usually in monetary format. And then after all that, the final deletion of the company takes place. That was actually all about the Estonian companies or business formats. I can now go on to the e-Notary Services, or maybe you have questions here before I continue with that.
There are actually 40 questions in the Q&A section. I don't know if we go over the e-Notary as well, or should we take the questions now? It's up to you.
We can take the questions now.
Okay, shall I read the questions from the Q&A section and then maybe you reply?
Let's try.
So Maxim is asking, can I run an OÜ without paying myself a salary as the only shareholder and board member?
Yes, you can only take out dividends.
What about the advisory board of an NGO? Is it required? I have seen that it is required for foundations.
It is required for foundations, but I don't think it is required for MTOs. I'm not entirely sure, but I don't think it's required.
Okay, so Marcin's question was basically, does an NGO and the foundation are different types of entities? So I guess they are, yes.
They are different types of entities, yes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The foundation is more like keeping a certain estate in a safe place.
Mm-hmm.
And NGO is more about members and activities and coming together as a group of people.
Mm-hmm.
One is about assets, the other is about people.
Okay. Suzanne is asking if the MTÜ allowed to collect donations from the EU or even all over the world.
Yes, sure, why not? But I know, at least from a few years ago, the MTÜs, the NGOs, were under a special scrutiny from the FIU, our financial intelligence unit, because many NGOs were used for money laundering. I don't know if it's the case anymore, but with foreign money, especially from East side, everybody should be careful.
Yeah. So Nikolai wrote that he has a startup based in Delaware and they would like to open a company in Estonia to serve EU customers. And he's asking what kind of legislation is available for them to meet requirements of a startup in Estonia, OÜ or a subsidiary.
OÜ, a subsidiary should be actually established in the form of OÜ. Mm-hmm. A subsidiary is not itself a specific legal form. So yes, you should establish a limited liability company, and there is no actually a special legislation for startups in Estonia. Yes, we are a startup country, but the legislation, the normal legislation for limited liability companies applies to all limited liability companies, also to startups.
Is it possible to form a private limited company with the shareholders being foreign companies too, or do the shareholders have to be private persons?
It is possible to form a company, establish a company with foreign limited companies, but the establishment process will be harder because you can't defer the payment of the share capital. You can't complete the registration portal without having a bank account first and paying the share capital while establishing it.
There's a question from Nikolai again. He's asking, how can you have a bank account for your company before registering your company? But I think it was when you were talking about the subsidiaries. I guess there you said that you would have to pay the share capital contribution right away.
Actually, in Estonia, it is possible to, the commercial code allows for a company that is still not registered in the business register to do some things. For example, open a bank account. But as an Estonian company, it is possible to do it in Estonian bank. But if you go to a foreign bank and you still hasn't, completed the registration process, it will be much more harder. This is why I'm saying that not being a natural person as the shareholder is much harder. The registration process is harder.
Mm-hmm. Can one e-resident sell shares of legal entity to another e-resident fully electronically and to a foreign EU or UK person?
To e-resident, yes, this is no problem with the remote authentication. Maybe I will speak about the e-Notary Services now, and then after that continue with that.
Yeah, I think so too. Otherwise we will don't know exactly how much time we have left. Sure.
Okay. So if you are an e-resident, you can of course establish a company online. Unless you want to make a contribution that is not a monetary contribution, but is rather a thing, maybe, or a proprietary right. For example, you don't have the money to put into the company, but you want to give the company some kind of equipment or maybe software or something like this. In that case, you need to go to a notary in Estonia. But also you can ask the help from a notary when you actually are able to sign everything digitally and want to make a monetary payment, because the notary fee for establishing a one-man company that's share capital is 2,500 euros is only 32 euros, and this already contains all the taxes. And in the beginning of this year, we launched 2 new projects, and this is why using the services of Estonian Notary is relatively easy, I think, for e-residents. First one is the self-service portal, where you can send the preliminary information about the notary. You can view the notary's calendars and find a suitable time for your transaction. Every type of transaction, for example, a company foundation has a special unit in the self-service portal, giving you the information, the preliminary information that is needed to enter for the notary to complete the articles of association and all the other establishment documents. You can also see the project of the documents in the self-service portal and pay the state fee and the notary's fee there. But the more important change is the remote authentication, which enables, for example, selling the share of a company from wherever you are when you are an e-resident. And actually we did this project thinking especially about e-residents, because the e-resident can establish a company in Estonia online. He can run the company online, but if he wants to sell the company later, up until this year's February, he had to come physically to Estonian notary to do it. But with the remote authentication, the person needs to log in. First, of course, make the appointment, log in with his e-residency card, wherever he is, home, office, beach. The parties can see the transaction on the screen. The notary will explain everything. Then they will sign it digitally and later access the transaction in the self-service portal. We are using a third person service provider for the biometry to compare the face of the person behind the screen with a passport photo to make the transaction more secure. And we established our own program for remote authentication. We are not using Skype or any other format for video conferencing. Yeah, as short answer to Nikolai's question. Was it Nikolai?
Yeah, thanks. That's great. Okay, so shall we take the rest of the questions now?
Yeah, sure.
How can a shareholder of an OÜ leave the company if he wants to? So I understand that this would be the case when there are several shareholders in a company and one of them wants to leave.
He can sell his share to the other shareholders or to a third person. This is the easiest way. Or if nobody wants to buy it, give it for free, maybe.
So basically it just can be assigned to another person, is that correct?
Yes, it is correct.
Okay. Grigori is asking, could you please comment on how to bring in intellectual property onto the balance of Estonian limited company, for example, software code? Is this something you can comment on?
I can't comment on that.
Okay. Sorry guys, this was too specific. I recommend looking for a business consultant for these kind of questions. Okay, can a shareholder of a one-person OÜ be an employee at the same time who is paid a regular salary? I'm guessing Susanne she's asking if she can own an OÜ and be an employee anywhere at the same time. Yes, this of course is possible.
Yeah, of course it depends on the employer. If you maybe have a restriction from your employer, for example, me as a notary candidate, I couldn't have a business. I'm restricted. If you don't have any of these kinds of restrictions, then yes, sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Grigori is asking another quite specific question. Maybe you can comment it, Katrin, I'm not sure. Does Estonian law have specific venture capital and angel investment forms?
As legal forms, no.
Okay, I hope it answered your question. Can a legal entity, for example, Estonian OÜ holding company, be a shareholder of another OÜ company and nominate its board member to act as board member of the second company to control its interests? I don't know if you understood that question.
Yes, one company as a parent company can have the company, and the management board member can be the same person.
Please comment on raising capital into an Estonian legal entity, for example, through crowdfunding or social networks. Is it legal to offer shares there? Are there any portals to seek investment from other e-residents? For the second part of the question, I think this is, you can contact Erika, which is the a non-profit association founded by e-residents, or just check in from the Estonian e-residents Facebook group to find e-residents in the interest of that. But I don't know, Katrin, can you reply for the first part? Raising capital for an Estonian legal entity, for example, through crowdfunding.
This is a difficult question. Well, this is done. And there are some great people offering these platforms, but the legal format of these transactions, well, basically it is not a share option agreement that would actually guarantee you the share. It is made through different legal constructions like loan agreements. This would take a lot of time to explain here. I'm not saying this is not legal. This is completely legal, but the result, the share as a result, might not be guaranteed in any case.
Okay, Alexei is asking, if a director of a company is a non-resident, should we still pay taxes for them in Estonia?
Yeah, I checked this from the tax office webpage, and it said that Estonian rules provide that directors' fees paid by an Estonian company to a non-resident director are always subject to 20% personal income tax. Tax treaties follow the same logic and normally allocate the taxing rights to the country where the company resides, not where the person resides. And this means that if the company is established in Estonia, the director's fees are taxed in Estonia in any case.
Can dividends...
Postal tax can be trickier. It depends on the place.
Yeah, I guess tax-wise, it's always, I also recommend always to ask advice from a professional tax advisor. So because they depend on so many variables, so it's always safe to ask someone. Okay, can dividends be paid out once per quarter? Not according to my knowledge, but I don't know, Katrin.
Well, you cannot take the decision, I think, of paying the dividends of a certain year after that year has ended and you have made the annual report, but you can make the decision that the dividends will be for that previous year will be paid for May or in June, but this is the past year's dividends already. You can't take the current year's dividends And current year's profits, like, okay, I made a good profit in 3 months, in the past 3 months, now I'm going to pay the dividends. This I don't think is possible. But I'm not 100% sure, but I don't think it's possible.
Okay. George is asking if a director who lives in another country from the company and still works for the company can be treated as a third-party contractor, not the director or employee. So basically, this is a question about how do you consider someone being a director?
Okay, the person who is the shareholder is a director and is also a third-party service provider for the same company.
This is how I understand the question, yes.
Well, legally you can do anything. I mean, like on the paper, but I don't know if it makes some changes in the taxes, then the tax office might always have a different opinion and say that you are not the service provider, you are the director in this case too, and we will tax you accordingly.
Yeah, to me it sounded like it's a scheme that would be definitely frowned upon if nothing more serious.
Yeah.
Yeah, someone's asking if 2 e-residents are needed to set up a non-profit association, then yes, it's you need 2 board members there. I guess they don't both have to be e-residents, but they have to be board members. You need 2 board members for a non-profit.
Yeah, non-profit, no, it can have 1 board member, but there must be at least 2 members to
okay.
establish.
Okay. But board members still only 1, right?
I think so, yeah. I can check it actually from the law. You can read the next question. You can read the next question. I will think about that.
What form can you recommend for a holding company that would just own shares of other companies?
Limited liability company. Do all shareholders must have e-residency or just the founder? Once again, please. Do all
shareholders have to have e-residency or just the founder?
To establish the company initially, all the shareholders who want to be the initial shareholders have to be residents, because otherwise it is not possible to enter them to the register.
Okay, let's take a few more questions. Does the B Corp form of company exists in Estonia? I don't know if you are familiar with the B Corp.
No.
Me neither. I'm sorry, again, too specific. Okay, and maybe 2 last questions.
Can I answer the NGO question?
Yeah.
The NGO must have at least 2 members, but there has to be only 1 board member.
Okay. Thanks. Jutta is asking, can I use the 2,500 share capital to buy assets such as IT equipment, or does this have to be money in the bank?
You can buy the IT equipment, yes. This will still be the net assets. That's okay.
Okay, and let's take the last question. Is it also possible to use the business registration portal to create a subsidiary?
Yes, because the subsidiary can be either a limited liability company or a branch office, so yes.
Yeah. Okay, guys, thank you very much for the questions and for listening in, and I apologize, we just ran out of time and we can't reply all to the questions. And thank you so much, Katrin, for sharing your wisdom and for the really good webinar. Thank you.
Thank you too. And if maybe there are some questions that are repeating, you can collect them and maybe forward them to me later. I can try and answer if there is not too much. Yeah.